Hey, me and Bob are back. We're here talking more South by Southwest. There's a lot of South by Southwest films. There always
So many
are.
movies, so many movies.
We're not even going to get to talk about all the stuff that we saw. I mean, there's some stuff I almost don't want to talk about because I'm like, good effort, but I don't want to shit all over you. But I hate to say it, some of the films we're talking about tonight I really, really liked. And some of them I really didn't like that much. But, you still go, wow, you were almost there. It's one of those nights. But you're almost there, and then you did that thing.
I will say for an overreaching festival like South by, I mostly do genre festivals. Like I'm a big horror guy. South by is a place where you get more than a dozen music theme films, and then you have world films, and then you have competition narratives, and then Midnighter, and then Spotlight, and all this stuff. There's so many pools that I cast a lot of nets. Like I think you should do at festivals like this. I wasn't totally into everything I saw, but I saw some stuff that I wouldn't have seen anywhere else and probably won't for quite some time. So it was still a big plus.
We even got on our first show of these, we did a movie we both really like called Bantu Mama, and the producer and sent a message from the director and from the producer saying, hey, we saw your review. Really, thanks a lot. And that always feels so good when someone's like, oh, they actually got to see us drooling over their art that they put out and going, that was fantastic. Good job, guys. And they're like,
and, I was really, it's kind of trite to say, it's an affirmation, but, in the email, she did mention, the writer and star, who's a producer of the film, that she liked that we got the impression of it that they thought that they were hoping that people would get. And thinking about our review, we did say a lot of it's pretty and whatever, but we really talked about it. It's a neat, solid, universal, and very specific, and mostly unseen story. And yeah, man. So big thumbs up to film festival still going strong in 2021.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about our first film, which is one of the big anticipated movies of the festival this year, which is the film Violet, directed and written and produced by Justine Bateman, which if you're younger, you probably don't remember who Justine Bateman is. But if you're old guy like me, you remember she was Michael J. Fox's sister on the old show Family Ties.
Family Ties.
That's where I knew her from. Apparently she was on Desperate Housewives and Californication, two shows I still have not gotten around to watching. I don't know if I will. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This is her directorial debut. And it stars Olivia Munn as the title character of Violet. Right off the bat, we see we're into a film that is like arty, but not slow per se. There's a lot of right off the bat, words are being written on the screen in front of us. And we hear a voiceover of Justin Theroux's voice. Like she's going like talking to people and they'll be like, oh, okay, thanks. And the voice will be like, he hates you. God, you're ugly.
And then on screen, it will say, I just want today to be okay.
Yeah. So you see like the part of her that's begging for help written on the screen, and the voice that's constantly telling her she's no good and she should just submit is the voice of Justin Theroux, who's not a character in the film, mind you. It's just, the voice that constantly tells her she's no good. And there's not really a plot per se here. It's more of like a basic setting that she is a Hollywood executive working for sort of a mid-level production company, and she is like, I forget what they said. Is she like vice president in charge of production or something like that?
Yeah, she might be like head of green lighting. She's picking the movies that they're actually going to work on.
But we see she works there, and she is, largely like the staff that work under her, practically interns, are like used to her letting him walk all over her. So they just do that. And, her personal assistant is like, why do you put up with this bullshit? Those people work for you. You need to put them in her place. But she's kind of scared too. And she goes through her life, and we see a lot of very familiar faces in here, but she goes through her existence with this voice that's just driving her down. And she lives with like literally the most handsome man in the entire planet, apparently, who's like, no, they're just friends. She's staying there while her kitchen is being remodeled or some shit. And they're like, no, they're just the best of friends. And this guy is like practically cut from marble. So you're like, all right, you don't cast the guy as the friend like that and be that good looking unless this is going to go somewhere, which I feel like is the biggest failing of this film ultimately, is that everyone is so beautiful, including him, that there's a point that even though as you watch her going through these struggles, there's a certain level anyone can identify with, but there's a point where that cuts off, where you're like, I and no one I know is anything like these people. And there's some degree of like, oh, come on, get it together. Jesus Christ. You're rich, you're beautiful, you're successful. Like, it's, I felt a little bit of like, you have all the advantages. I get it. Still, even people with advantages have that voice. I mean, it's like, I would love to see what Justine Bateman does next, but I really don't care what Violet does next. You know what I mean? The character.
Yeah, I think maybe if we had either toned up her at work and maybe cut out, well, not toned out. I mean, if we had either got more of either one, the romance stuff just kind of seems like it's there. It's the part of the movie to me that I like, that his character is a guy in her life that's just like, try it. And if it's for you, just like, go live life and whatever. And that's cool. But, then we try and make sort of a romance there in the second half. And I liked all the parts of the film. I really dug its take on, if you want to say, self-doubt or anxiety. And they did a great job. I think the visual presentation of the movie worked for me. I watched this living here with my sister and her husband, and we had Justin Theroux's voice, like you said, cutting her down. And then we had Olivia Munn talking in the movie, and then we had her thoughts on screen and us yelling. Like we were very vocal during this movie. I think it was kind of cathartic. Maybe I almost liked it more than if I had just watched it by myself, because we were amped. We were yes-anding the writing on the screen. We were cursing out the assistants. We were, we called the boss as soon as we saw him, which I think is, there's some not tropey, but there is some archetypal stuff in this movie. Like in the Q&A, she talks about the production office she works in, the boss that she has. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And she's like, I picked it because he would be the kind of guy that he doesn't care about architecture, but that boss would be the guy that go, oh, my office is in the whatever, the Frank Lloyd Wright house that I own that's
Right.
down the street, that kind of guy. And I thought that did kind of help to kind of cement where it was going, so they could kind of go wild with the I don't even know if you call it narration, but
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I think I go more on, no, it was tropey, not just archetypal. It was like the story couldn't have been more cliched, but
Yeah.
there's so much style. There's so much, the device works so well and has a lot of interesting things to say and is worth examining. And Olivia Munn is kicking ass in the performance as well. I kind of was like, maybe you shouldn't have made this about like a rich, powerful Hollywood person who is dealing with this. Although I'm sure that, people who've lived in Hollywood since they were little kids, that's what they have to identify with. But for the rest of the world, it's much more identifiable if they had found a way to bring it down a notch, to make it feel like, oh, this is accessible. Because I just, there's that point, it just blockaded for me there. But yeah, I mean, there's so much good stuff here that it makes me excited to see what Bateman does next. And as always, I count myself officially a fan of Olivia Munn. I think she went from, her start was what? She was on G4, I think. Was that it? And I was like, whatever, I don't care. She's just another pretty face on a talk site, if you will. I mean, it was the video game equivalent of Entertainment News. And then she turned into this person who's like, wow, you got some serious fucking chops. So, hey, good for her. But Violet's not a film I'm personally going to return to, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it'd be neat to, I don't know if even watch it, it'd be neat to talk to other people about this film. This is a film that, like we're talking about, the device is so unique. I mean, I just watched a couple films here at South by, like the Romeo and Juliet, that's all screenshots and, live feeds and all this stuff on the screen. But this one, there was just something really light and super effective about that white kind of almost cursive writing on the screen that kept the tone kind of going. I thought there was some, there's a scene where they're showing two cars, and the tension was enough for the character that I'm like, oh my god, everybody's gonna die in a car crash. Like, they did get that for me, so I dug the situation she was in, but like you're saying, there's just a little bit. It's not all the way for me. I am absolutely jazzed to see whatever Justine Bateman's doing after this.
Yeah,
because
who knew? She's obviously brimming with talent. No
yeah,
question.
this is a big hit out of the gate for her first full feature.
Yeah, agreed. Well, let's talk about our next one, which is a full animated film called The Spine of Night. That I'll tell you now, people who are big fans of the original heavy metal movie were really excited for this one. And, well, Bob is going to be the one to describe the plot and tell you why.
Okay, so this film is from Philip Gillot, I believe, Morgan Gallen King, and this is two guys that were into, like Chris said, the older style of fantasy that was kind of you know, what you think about Dungeons and Dragons, if you're not into that stuff, when you see that stuff on screen, like the original animated Hobbit, stuff like that, but not quite as, you know, dramatic. There was a lot of fun stuff, but back then, a lot of the animated stuff was pretty misogynistic. It was kind of one-dimensional. It was a lot of clinking beers and, you know, chauvinism and stuff like that. But these two guys still loved it. And so what they purposely went out and did was write a story that wasn't trying to do something completely different, but just keep everything they loved and put stuff they hadn't seen before, which is more female characters, you know, in the lead role, like we'll see here, and a little bit more, less about the man and the power than more about, you know, it's not just magic, there's some bigger force and stuff like that. And so this is a movie that was animated over 7 years, that was almost completely lost to a Windows 10 update.
Oh, Jesus.
Not too long ago. But after a 2-week retrieval, scene by scene, they were able to put it back together. And I really dug it. Like Chris said, I think when I mentioned it to him, what I had heard was heavy metal, but not space. It's fantasy and like really violent.
Yeah,
but I didn't really hear
more
that
like
I really...
It's more like the magazines than it is in the movie, but it has that same, here's lots and lots of full frontal nudity, like lots of it. And when it's gory, it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, gory.
Yeah, this one sure did go all the way with the skin and the blood. And what I really dug about it was the psychedelic type stuff. So we've got a flower that's either a remnant or a piece of a world that was before, that we get in a lot of worlds like stories like this that are epic. We have a guy way out, you know, the guardian who's protecting the last one. He's been here for hundreds of thousands of, you know, how some of these stories are set up. And he gets visited by a woman who walks up and is like, you know what, guess what? I got one of these too. That's not the only one. Let me tell you a story. And we get 3 big chunks of narrative that go in different directions, the last of which, it was crazy, man. It reminded me of some of the far out panels from some of the cool comics like Doctor Strange and stuff I like. Some really neat zooming into the eyeballs, spacey stuff that was fun to watch. Great midnight movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, first off, this has a great cast. Lucy Lawless voices the sort of narrator / lead character. She's actually not in most of the film as a character, even though ultimately it's all about her. Mm-hmm. But she is the character who's like, you know, shows up all naked, but for some furs and talking to the Guardian, played by Richard E. Grant, telling the story. He tells the story of their stories. But Patton Oswalt plays sort of like a pathetic evil king. Joe Manganiello, I never know how to say that right, is in this. Yeah. Patrick Breen, Larry Fessenden, Jason Gore. It's a decent cast of people. Rob McCure. And I think anyone who really loves like Michael Moorcock books, like the Elric type stuff, is going to go like hog fucking wild for this and be like, wow, this is what I've been waiting for. And, you know, I grew up liking that stuff. It took a little while before I was sure what this was doing, but by the end I was like, I'm all with this, man. I wish there was more of it.
Yeah. I remember thinking when the second act, I guess you could call it, the second big piece of the generational stories happening, Man, I wonder what they're gonna do after this. And but I like you said, man, by the time you get to the last 30 minutes, this was great. It's all the stuff like I think they said from the outset, all the stuff about this kind of stuff that you like.
Yeah. It's
You
like
know,
barbarian fantasy, but mixed with a bit of steampunk and like, I don't know. It's not deeply reminiscent of any other given thing plot wise. I mean, it's really creative what they
yeah,
do. And the story, when they get to the story of what the origin stories of the flowers were and sort of the birth of this world, it's so cool. And the way they chose to animate it is really neat. And I was like, all together, this thing never bores you. It's, I mean, it's graphic as fuck in multiple different levels for one thing. And it's drawn pretty well. I do think the character models are a little simplistic, but like all the backgrounds and all the details are really, really well done. Yeah, this is top-notch animation for a audience that I think most people thought just didn't really exist anymore, but I'm pretty sure we're going to find them coming out of the woodwork when this movie gets a wider release.
yeah, I can see this movie being acquired by Shudder. You know, I think this is a really cool movie that's like those, when the mainstream artist tries to do the crossover, it's not that they made a horror fantasy movie or an animated epic tale. It's just that there you can feel the love for the film. You know, like you said, the story's really neat and the voice acting is just kind of like a great cherry on top. And I love that Patton Oswalt was in it, but it didn't kill the vibe for me. Usually when I hear him, I just start thinking about his Twitter feed and shit like that. But this one.
He's playing a wormy guy, and you're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
Patton Oswalt's kind of, I mean, he's like a good wormy guy, but that's his voice. Like,
Yeah.
You're like, they
So-
didn't miscast him at all.
That was good.
There are things that man must not know.
Well, we're going to move on to our next one, which is a horror film. In fact, a lot of people refer to it straight up as a slasher film, which I guess is technically accurate, called Sound of Violence.
When I hear certain sounds, I don't just hear them. I see them.
Now, the impression I got from the trailer was that this was going to be very much an art horror type film. Imagine my surprise to discover that, not really. No, I mean, a little bit, but this is really kind of a great idea for a horror movie that unfortunately just turns into a Saw movie. That was my take on it anyway. But Jasmine Savoy Brown plays Alexis Reeves. At first, when we meet her, she's just a little girl, played by someone else, obviously. And we see she was deaf. Her father had come back from somewhere, has severe PTSD, like severe. And then, you know, she comes out and finds that her father is just brutally murdering her mother, just stabbing her to death. And she grabs like a meat tenderizing hammer from the kitchen and bashes him with it. And at the moment she bashes him, there's like color explodes all over the screen. And she's like, whoa, what the hell was, she sees it. She's like, wow, what was that? It's like, oh my God, that feels good. And you're like, uh-oh, this little girl just got herself a taste for murder because she has synesthesia that only comes out when she commits or is witness to acts of extreme violence. So flash to her much older, she's a atypically normal person who lives with her best friend, played by Lily Simmons. And, she teaches music theory, I think is what they said it was. Like, I think she's like a TA, and she is regularly going and trying to record stuff. She goes with her friend to try and record, like they paid to record an S&M session with a guy being whipped, and she kind of gets a little too into it. And you're like, okay, we see what's happening here. This is a girl who's really, who's recovered her hearing, but you get the feeling like it's kind of reliant, her keeping it on her continuing to get these little blasts here and there of like the synesthesia from violence. And we see she's going into that point where she's going from someone who's like just recording and witnessing other people's things to, well, basically I got to set up a bunch of elaborate saw traps to murder people in to really get what I'm doing. Now, all right, like that sounds cool, but I think the problem here is that this is just really a mediocre as fuck film in terms of the script. Like, the cop is right out of the Saw sequels. Like, that level of dialogue where you're like, this is fucking terrible. Like, I mean,
what's going on here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, this script is so bad. It's like whoever the story by, like, genius. Whoever wrote the actual dialogue, come on, dude. Because this is just silly as fuck. And I think that's what annoys me so much, because it's such a great idea for a horror movie. If they had just leaned into the artistic aspects of it and the ideas of getting more into the synesthesia instead of just like, I mean, they set it up like they wanted to be a franchise killer movie. And I'm like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah, that was that in particular thing you're talking about specifically, I was like, no.
Yeah.
I will say, though, this one, I did have fun watching, but that's because I would say this is 100% a Midnighter. This was in the Midnighter character. This is Jasmine Savoy Brown, who I love from The Leftovers, and Lily Simmons, who we loved as the wild Amish girl in Banshee.
Oh, yeah. So great.
In what started as a really good short that got a feature that just kind of, like, it really goes for it, man. Like, when no one's going to allude to it any more than this, but this film has what I'll call the full banana pants ending. Like, when people talk to you about, I saw this crazy movie that they showed at midnight, this is the kind of films that people make on purpose. And I'm kind of hoping that there was an abandoning of, coherent, dialogue and supporting stuff in the aim of, no, man, this is about light and blood. And it was cool. The gory stuff was kind of neat.
It's
but like
full gore, yeah.
like Chris said, when it turns into more stuff we've seen before in other movies type stuff, I'm not really a big Saw fan. So those parts were kind of like, okay, I just want to, let's get the story forward. But there's only one place that this is really going, especially because at some point we only have a certain amount of characters. So what do you think is going to happen?
I think if you go into this expecting a B film that's made entirely to be like, let's see how crazy they can get this, then you can enjoy it on that level. But if you're expecting this to be taking itself seriously on any level, and then you're watching the wrong movie.
It's funny is when you told me this is one you were watching, and I was like, why didn't I have it on my list? And I went back and read it. I was like, I think I remember reading it and being like, well, if I have time, but like, that's going to be really dark. Like you said, I thought we were going to get a violin scored, tragically sad. No, that's not what this is.
No, I mean, like, female-led film with two strong female actresses, really cool premise, like, obviously sort of a beautiful visual feel. You're like, wow, I was expecting something like The Performance. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, man, I'm psyched for this. But, I mean, part of it, admittedly, is this was not at all the movie I was expecting. And by the time I realized what it was, I'm going, I don't think I like this kind of movie unless I'm really drunk with a whole crowd of people for it, Yeah,
like I said, I dug it because I started this at like 2 a.m. So this was a end of the night, 3 sheets to the wind type flick. And once I figured out that's what's going, because you absolutely do not get that in the first 10 minutes. Like, it's a very different film until we cut to the present. And then when they do, it's just kind of like, that's what that was. But check this out. She doesn't know where her line is or that she has a line. And then by the time she figures out a line, she don't give a shit about any of that anymore.
Yeah. And like I said, the plot is it just doesn't make sense. Like the whole thing with her being like deaf, but then not deaf. And they never really. So is it tied into the synesthesia? What does that mean? It's kind of, they didn't put any real thought into it. It's like there, but only for convenience sake. It's like, there's a lot of stuff like that here. Some people have also pointed out there's, she's basically obviously wants to be gay with her best friend who doesn't know it. And there's an insinuation. They're like, okay, so there's a low key insinuation that is part of her insanity. And so therefore bad. And you get it. You can read into that whether you want to or not. But I'm saying it's there. Anyway, let's move on to our final film we're talking about this week, which is Alien on Stage. I know you're like, I got to see what this is. Well, Bob, why don't you tell us what this is?
And I wrote it. Dave is my dad, and he's obviously the director. My mum, who's also playing Ripley.
Calling Antarctica Traffic Control.
And my granddad designed the set.
Nobody has got their lines going smoothly. This is our last chance to get this right.
Okay, so here's the scene. We're in England, and there's a small bus company, in a small part of England, and, some people have darts clubs. I'm sure they, maybe book clubs. Maybe that's a little more American. But what these guys and girls got going on is they, every Christmas, have a little theater group, I guess you could call it. And they put on, I guess what you could call a rote play, where it's kind of jokey into the audience, and maybe you get them to sing along a little bit. It's mostly a Christmas thing, so it's, real vibey and stuff like that. Well, this year, it wasn't going to happen, which I assume the year I'm talking about is 2019. The writer, who is a young man, part of the company, these are bus drivers and the people that work in the bus offices. He decides, if I'm going to write the play this year, we're going to do a movie. And I think the choices were, when I read more, Predator, Alien, Pulp Fiction, and
there was one that was weird. It's like, really?
And so
one of these things doesn't belong.
The oldest film of the group, being Alien, I think maybe is the one that got picked, because a lot of the cats that work there are a little bit older. He's obviously a younger cat of the group. They pick Alien, and so they get to play together. They've got the guys that are kind of more homebodies, and they're going to build sets, and we're going to build a xenomorph, and we're going to do all this stuff, and we're going to throw it like we usually do right around Christmas, and we'll see how everybody likes it. We're going to get into it and learn our lines. And the guy who's usually stern in the office, who is kind of quick because he admits that, he came from the military and it's hard to shake that stuff, and he knows it doesn't work with everybody, is going to be our stage director. And what sets up our film is that they put on the play and only about 20 people show up. And they didn't really know what to make of it, because it said Alien on the posters, but they've been coming to the Christmas joint, at the community playhouse, to come see the buddies that work at the bus place do some fun, jokey stuff. And this was, a Ridley Scott film. Well, what also happens that night is that two filmmakers were in the audience, and they make a connection, and they offer to start a Kickstarter, which ends up, I assume, funding not only our documentary that we're now watching, but also a trip to take the production to a theater in the West End of London, which would be like Broadway here in the United States. And, there's two things that I want from a documentary. If I know that it's not going to be sad, there's some really dark stuff, that only gets really broached on screen in documentaries, and that's a different kind of thing. But I'm looking for one that, I want to see something that's life affirming and, optimistic. And this was just class. I loved it. The production is great. The cast of characters is great. You get a pretty good look at some cats that unbelievably do everything that you see on screen while also working full-time jobs.
I described it as, if you like movies like The Full Monty, this is like a documentary version of that.
Yeah.
With and there's 100 British films that are basically just a retelling of The Full Monty, but with, instead of like males stripping on stage for charity, it's people doing something else that's weird and doesn't really fit that homespun British person, small village personality type. And these are all, they're like strong personalities, but they're all, they're bus drivers. And like, was it Croydon or something like that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I believe so.
But you're like, okay, so this is all new to them. They've all old enough so they've seen Alien, probably most of them multiple times. It was a legendary film. And where this gets fun, though, is about 20 minutes in, because at first you're like, okay, we get it. They're like kind of quirky, but nobody is like, it's not scripted at all. So you're like, all right, well, they're just kind of it's guy with a camera filming everything. And not much interesting is going on until they get to that point where you're like, oh, now we're starting to build the props and figure out how to do this. Like, oh, well, this is a little more interesting. How would you do some of that stuff in Alien? And when you finally get to, we're heading to fucking London for the West End, that's when this movie really wins you over, as everyone is like practically throwing up nervous, sold out house. They're like not sure everything is going to work. And, you know, you get to see not the whole play, but, you know, the highlights of it as it's going. And it's really charming. I think there's no plan here. There's not really a director per se. You know, it literally is just somebody filming absolutely everything. The person who to thank for this working at all is whoever edited it, because it's assembling what was obviously like probably 50 hours of footage and cutting it down.
Yeah, and then it even cuts in time multiple times, you know, in the timeline. Because like Chris is saying, we get about halfway into the film and then somebody kind of mentions an egg, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, they did Alien. Like, we're going to get a chest burster, and we're going to get stuff flying around and people crawling around. We're going to get a xenomorph. And you really do get to see this really cool from the heart take on, you know, this is what's on the sheet today, so let's make it happen.
And yeah, I want to be clear. I don't think this is like one of those must-see documentaries, but I think if you are a fan of those type of British films we're talking about, if you are a fan of Alien, if you've ever been involved in theater on any level and have like, oh, we're going to, you know, maybe our eyes are a little too big for our stomach, but we're going to try this anyway and see what happens type productions, then you're going to totally love Alien on stage. It is really charming, and I quite liked it. I hope this is another one. I'm like, this is a film that Shudder should totally pick up, even though it's not their normal fare. It would round out what they do kind of nicely. It's one of those nice little quirky things to shove into the list. I hope they or somebody like them picks this up.
I can just about see.
But that is, in fact, our show for this time. I think we'll probably get together one more time and do like our lightning round where we can talk about all the films that we want to recommend that we each saw separately but didn't see together. And other than that, that was South by Southwest. Thanks, Bob, for joining me again this week. And we'll be back again in another day or so.
All right.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching our video. This is Oneofus.net. Like and subscribe to keep us going. Check out all the rest of the videos we have here on YouTube. Go to Oneofus.net for tens of thousands of audio recording podcasts that we've done reviewing your favorite movies and television shows. And you can even become a subscriber there for yet more stuff, including commentaries for movies and television shows. Join Oneofus.net, support Oneofus.net, like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.